What exactly is the gospel? Writers write of it, singers sing of it, preachers preach on it, right? Like this guy named Paul who wrote much of the New Testament, like he was enthralled by it, he was overtaken by it. So, what is this thing called the gospel? I say it all the time. What is this thing called the gospel? And I would say this: the gospel is the most important concept, it's the most important term that the world has ever known. It's this central message that differentiates us from every other religion. So what exactly is the gospel? And I would say once we know like cold what the gospel is, we will exponentially grow in our walk with Christ. Like once you have a firm understanding of what the gospel is, you will begin to grow leaps and bounds in your relationship with Jesus. So I thought it would be really important that we would, or profitable really, that for the next 5 or several weeks, we would just unpack concept by concept what is the gospel, because this is the most important message the world has ever known. And so this first week, I'd like to talk to you about this concept that the word gospel is actually a historical term. It actually originated outside of the Bible and then it was incorporated into the Bible. So it was first a word found in history. So what does this word mean? It's a very interesting word. It's a very interesting concept. And so kings and emperors, they would go off to battle because they would want to expand their kingdom and they would want to, they would want to get a bigger reach. And so they would take all of their able-bodied soldiers and warriors and anybody who they thought could help them in the battle. They would go off to the distant land to expand the kingdom. And that left their own empire, their own city, their own village, somewhat vulnerable. Not completely vulnerable, but somewhat vulnerable. And this town, this city, this empire, they would be waiting on pins and needles to hear the news of what was going on with their king. And so after the battle, the king would send a messenger back to the people. And that messenger would watch. He would carry with him something called the Evangelion, which is the good news, which is the gospel. And that messenger would stand before the city and the empire and he would say, listen, our king is not defeated. We are not going to be a conquered people. We are still free. So that's the historical understanding of the word gospel. Now, you and I know, right, that Jesus did not come to establish a military kingdom 2,000 years ago. He came to establish a spiritual kingdom. So when we start to talk about the ministry of Jesus, and he says, I have come to bring a gospel, what is he saying? He's saying that in me, you can be free. In me, you can be, you can escape captivity. In me, right? Like the chains can be broken. That's why he's called the chain breaker, is because he releases us from captivity. That's the good news. That's the gospel, is that we are now free. We're no longer held in spiritual captivity. Now, I would make this one point about the gospel and our freedom, and that is this. I believe that the gospel and our spiritual freedom has more to do with the name of God than our own soul and our own life. Listen, do I love being free? Do I love this spiritual freedom that is found in Christ? Yeah, absolutely. I'm enthused by it. I'm overwhelmed by this spiritual freedom. However, here's what I would say. It has more to do with the name of God, because here it is. People who are in spiritual captivity, the only thing they can offer is an obligation. People who are spiritually free, they're able to offer a choice. And so the great good news of the gospel, right, is that we are given the freedom to choose what or who we're going to worship. And so as we unpack this understanding of the gospel, and as we look through it, and as we go and kind of just look at it from angle by angle and concept by concept, this first week it has to deal with our spiritual freedom and the idea that we get to now choose to worship God, because he's not interested in an obligation. He's interested in a choice. And so the good news is that we are given this choice to worship God. What will you choose?